Hello and welcome to Wardens of the Cross. This is the Defender. There are many different sects and divisions which all call themselves Christian, but if using logic and intelligence, one can easily see and know that only one of these may be the true Church of God. We can know this due to the fact that, when Jesus came to earth, all of his apostles and disciples formed one church and had his teachings protected by themselves. As time and history went on, there became heresies and fallacies which came out of God's church, and eventually the Protestant Reformation came about, which shattered the Christian world into many different sects. Of all of these, only the Catholic Church has maintained the teachings and the form of what Christianity was after the ascension of our Lord. In the following, we shall see what sets Catholicism apart, how we can tell that it is truly God's church, and also see how we can tell that Christianity does follow the one true God. One of the ways which we can tell that Catholicism is God's church is due to the fact that it actually claims divine revelation. For the amount of, quote, religions which exist in the world, there are only 3 which actually claim that God has revealed his will to them, these being Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. A religion cannot be led by God or created by him if it does not even believe that he exists. There are even many, quote, religions which do not even follow a god or worship a god, with an example being the cult of Buddhism. Buddhism does not believe in a special god or deity, but rather its teachings were created by its founder, Siddhartha Gautama. The teachings of Buddhism claim that, through meditation and obtaining complete knowledge, one will enter a land called nirvana after they die, and this will make them escape reincarnation and karma. None of the teachings of Buddhism ever reference anything about a god or gods until it was decided later that it was a polytheistic religion. It still has no official teaching on the creation or how the world and universe came about, which leads us to another reason we can believe Catholicism is God's church. It has the Bible, and while Protestant denominations have a Bible too, theirs is not the complete version which was first created and assembled. The Bible was first assembled by the early Christians, and as history and the beliefs of these early Christians show, these people were the first Catholics. This book, the Bible, is the most complete collection and compilation of religious texts. As well as this, the writings in the Bible are almost 4,000 years old in some places, and the content and stories contained reach back to the creation of the world as described in Genesis. We can know that the Bible is a legitimate book due to the fact that their writings are collected from many authors and from many ages, and it was only compiled around 400 AD by St. Jerome, almost 2,000 years after some of the first books featured had been written. Within the writings of the Bible can be found the 4 Gospels, of which 3 are eyewitness accounts to the life of Jesus Christ, these being from Matthew, Mark, and John. We can also see the New Testament, which shows the trials and victories of the early Christians. One could argue that the Gospels could have been coordinated and written in tangent so as to appear real, but the facts would point otherwise. For a start, the details within the Gospels vary and tend to be very sketchy in some parts and vivid in others. We can also believe that the Gospels, and in extension all of the New Testament, is accurate and reliable due to the fact that it was written within living memory of Jesus Christ. For example, nowhere in the New Testament is the destruction of Jerusalem mentioned or referenced, despite being foretold by Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. This would signal that all of the books found within the New Testament would have had to have been written before 70 AD, which was the year Jerusalem was razed to the ground by the Roman legions. One last argument we shall present to prove the validity of the New Testament is that there are no Jewish or Roman arguments which ever prove the Christian claims as false. The Jews, especially the Pharisees, despised Christianity due to the fact that it undermined all of their corruption and swindling. They did everything they could to stamp out the early Christians with any means necessary, including martyring Stephen as seen in the Acts of the Apostles. We also see later on in the writings that the Roman Empire grew tired of the Christians and also began persecuting them. Since these nations and powers were willing to kill to try and be rid of the followers of Christ, one can logically assume that they would try and debunk Christian arguments as well. However, for this, there is no evidence whatsoever that the Pharisees provided any valid arguments to prove that Jesus was still dead, and they never disproved the resurrection, which would have been easily debased with simply the presenting of his body. Now, after having looked at all of this to prove that Jesus was truly God and that Christianity does truly follow him, we shall look at how we can know that Catholicism is truly God's church. We can know that Catholicism is God's church due to the fact that it is the only Christian denomination which still follows all of his teachings. The early Christians were not called Catholics in the sense of the word as we know it today, but rather they were the only Christians, and their teachings and traditions are only fully practiced by Catholicism nowadays. This obviously leaves Catholicism as holding the standard of Christ solely. Now, rather than just state this and leave it there, we shall look at a few examples of how Catholicism is the only Christian branch which has followed Christ faithfully since he ascended back to heaven. Catholicism is the only group of all the Christians that still condemn birth control. Birth control was condemned by the early Christians in the writings of Clement of Alexandria in 195 AD, Hippolytus of Rome in 255 AD, and also St. Augustine in 419 AD. Despite the writings of all these Christians and more going ardently against the wasting and abusing of sex, Catholicism is the only Christian religion to adhere to these teachings through the ages. As well as the age-old teaching on contraception, another unique attribute of Catholicism, linked especially to the early Christians, is the presence of a leader in the form of the Pope. The first leader of the Christian world was Pope Peter, who was instituted by Jesus himself, as is seen in Matthew 16:18. After Pope Peter came Pope Linus, and then Pope Analectus, and so on down through the ages. Catholicism is the only branch of Christianity which has maintained the existence of a leader and a hierarchy down through the ages. For example, the leader of the Church of England is the King or Queen of England. However, Anglicanism did not come about until Henry VIII, who was the first leader of this heresy. One last way we shall present for the defense of Catholicism as God's church is the presence of veneration and admiration for the saints. Despite what other Christian denominations say about this supposed, quote, worship and adoration, end of quote, of the saints and of Mary, it does reach back to early Christian times. There are many quotes which may be presented for the veneration of Mary specifically, and to show that she was quite relevant in early Christian circles, but for the sake of time we shall present only two. The first quote is from St. Epiphanius, who states that, quote, Eve was called the mother of the living. After the fall, this title was given to her. True it is, the whole race of man upon earth was born from Eve, but in reality it is from Mary the life was truly born to the world, so that by giving birth to the living one, Mary became the mother of all living. End of quote. We also see, as quite obvious proof of early Christian devotions to Mary, the following prayer. Quote, We fly to your patronage, O holy Theotokos. Despise not our petition in our necessities, but deliver us always from all dangers, O ever glorious and blessed Virgin. End of quote. This prayer comes from the walls of a catacomb in Rome dated to the 3rd century AD. Theotokos is Greek for God-bearer, which can be referring only to the Virgin Mary, who is and was the Mother of God. Despite the trials of time and the assaults of many heresies and many men, Catholicism lives on as it always has. There are those within it who seek to corrupt it and to undermine it, but Catholicism shall always be the same as it was, founded and created by God. As Jesus Christ himself told us, the gates of hell shall not overcome it. The evidence points to the fact that Jesus was truly God. Christianity does truly follow the one God, and Catholicism is truly God's one church. One can often wonder how any can stand against the Church or argue otherwise when the evidence presented by history, scholars, and even the early Christians themselves can prove otherwise. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you agree with what you heard in this content, give us a like. If you have a comment, question, concern, or anything else, please feel free to comment below and we'll get back to you. Subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date on all of our most recent content, and go to the link shown on the screen to check out our website at www.wardenofthecross.weebly.com. We hope to see you again. God bless.